Welcome to Under the Microscope. I am your host, Jenny Germano. Thank you, everyone, for joining me. Today's topic is going to be protecting employees, understanding worker protection standards in cannabis cultivation operations. Before we dive in, I'm just going to give a little bit of a background about myself. I got my start working in the cannabis industry in 2009 in Denver, Colorado, working and running vertically integrated cannabis operations. After doing that for 6 years, in 2015, I founded my company, ICS Consulting, and I have been helping cannabis operators navigate the regulatory landscape across the United States for the last 10 years. So let's everyone give a really nice warm welcome for my next guest, Alex Herding from Red Wolf Risk. Welcome, Alex.
Thanks, Jenny.
If I had a
Excited.
little applause, cheering, little piece, I would add that in. We've done a couple episodes together, and I always like to team up with you when we
Yeah.
dive in to these more complex conversations when it comes to cannabis operations. Before we start talking about the topic, why don't you just give a little bit about your background so people can understand how do you even know about these things that we're going to be
Yeah.
talking about today?
So, worker protection standard. Excited about this. This is obviously something I'm very familiar with. EPA standard. I have a background in environmental science, watershed science. I'm a hydrologist, soil scientist. Have a big background in worker safety. I've worked with multiple different entities, including a large engineering company where I worked in the field and did all things for them, including working on EPA standards and regulations. I became a caregiver in 2009 when the green rush happened. So I was growing cannabis plants for patients. This rule actually can potentially apply to those types of caregiving situations. And I started a cultivation, one of the first recreational or retail license they gave out here in Colorado. And of course, the this work protection standard applied to that operation as well. I've gone off and worked with other multiple cannabis operations, helped them develop worker protection standard programs to make sure that they're compliant with these standards. So I'm really familiar with these standards and happy to dive deep with you as always.
Yeah, I'm excited to tackle this topic with you. We've talked about it a lot of times. We've talked about worker safety, health and sanitation. We have talked about OSHA. And this one, obviously, it's very nuanced. We're really talking about this one standard that's required. And so this is something that's required for cultivation. It's specifically for agriculture and crops. This is not something that they need to worry about if they're a manufacturer or dispensary. This is really just for the listeners in case they do not understand
Yeah.
this.
So typically, the way I've had regulators explain it to me is that if you have an operation that has pesticides applied at any time, and any employees that work in or around that area of pesticide application, they all need to be trained, and these standards need to be adopted and enforced.
If there's cultivation facilities or anyone who works at a cultivation facility that's listening and you did not realize that you needed to do this, is going to be a great episode for you, as well as for anyone in a new emerging market. This is something that you need to think about getting completed for your cultivation facility. And then for all those operators that, they do have the standard implemented at their facility, kudos to you. And this might just be more of a refresher. So I wanted to first start with a lot of times this program is referred to WPS, which basically stands for Worker Protection Standards. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, as we know, the EPA, they created the original worker protection standard for agricultural pesticides in 1992 to protect workers and handlers from pesticide exposure in settings like farms and forests, nurseries and greenhouses, and obviously cannabis cultivation. This would be in this category. And it's basically to reduce the risk of illness or injury to workers and handlers from occupational exposures to pesticides. So, why is this relevant to cannabis? Why don't you go ahead and take that one, Alex?
It's very clearly because cannabis operators use pesticides. So, like you mentioned, there's two types of workers. There's handlers and workers.
Yep.
Workers are anybody that works in or around the area of pesticide applications. And this could be potentially trimmers, right? If trimmers actually have to walk through an area that has pesticide application, then they need this training and this standard applies to them. The handlers are the ones who will transport or actually apply the pesticides. And I know pesticides, this is a buzzword for a lot of growers. I know a lot of growers say they don't use pesticides, um, which I understand. Some like to think they'll use a safer spray. And EPA actually has a designation for this. So anytime you apply any type of pesticide, there'll be an EPA registration number on that pesticide. They'll tell you how to use the pesticide legally and safely. But sometimes they have designations called 25B. And that means this is a safe, organic, potentially organic. A lot of 25B falls in the OMRI, which is the organic standard. Oh, it's like clove oils and all this safe kind of natural sprays. So a lot of people think, oh, this isn't a pesticide from the point of view of many states and the EPA, if you apply anything to a plant that with the intention of controlling a pest, is technically a pesticide.
Including like seed
Yeah.
oils. Yeah.
And yep. So there's a lot of nuance here that actually some growers are familiar with. But technically, if you're going to spray a plant and it has anything in it that is going to control something you don't want on the plant, then it's a pesticide. So if you're doing that, then you need to follow these standards.
So if I'm a cultivation facility and I do sulfur burning, hopefully I said that right.
Yep.
And I am not a grower. I only know this because I've been in the cannabis industry for 16 years and I audit a lot of cultivation facilities, and a lot of cultivation
Mhm.
facilities are my clients. So I do know about the sulfur burning and smoke. In some cases, in some states, it's actually banned. The Department of Agriculture, it might be on their not approved list. In
Mhm.
Colorado, we do have an approved pesticide list, but other states it may vary, right? In Michigan or Missouri, it just depends on what that state has implemented.
Developers, that's going to control a lot of those mite types of
Hmm.
situations and other pests as well. Molds, actually, and sulfur is a very common one, but it is technically a
Yeah.
pesticide. Yep.
I want to also mention the risk, and we're going to actually dive into the core requirements for WPS, but I want to talk about the risk that can happen if your cultivation facility is not engaged or implementing the requirements that we're going to talk about today. Can result in fines, license violations, and also worker safety incidents. And who could they get fines from, Alex?
This is where it gets interesting. This is where it
Yeah.
actually gets complicated and confusing for operators. This is an EPA standard, right? And because there's the federal confusion as of now, the recording, obviously things could change immediately after this recording. But as of now, it is still Schedule 1, which means that it's federally illegal to do what all these states are doing, and the EPA has is between a rock and a hard place. Now, while OSHA and the IRS will come into a cannabis facility and pretend they're not witnessing a federal crime, the EPA is not really there yet. And what happens is this standard gets usually pushed down to the state's Department of Agriculture. So here in Colorado, it's the CDA, Colorado Department of Ag, but they're very familiar with this standard, and there's a lot of overlap between agricultural standards, the USDA, and the USDA actually requires to record all the pesticide applications, and that's part of this. So there's a little overlap already between what they're enforcing and this standard, but that is typically where this enforcement will come from, is your state
Yeah,
department.
and I'm actually really glad that you brought up the confusion because that kind of segues into I have a couple questions around that, which is One, how does the WPS differ from OSHA and their PPE requirements? And why do I need to do both? And I'm asking if I was a cultivator and I didn't know the answer
Well,
to this.
and this is honestly has been confusing to really everybody. That's a great question, and it is one of the bigger confusions. And so, as of lately, and I want to say at least the last couple years, if not maybe 3 or so, there is a PPE standard. And that standard, basically, it's really you have to follow. So this is something that's really important that every operator needs to know, and there is a lot of overlaps. Anytime you buy a chemical that you plan to use in your business, be it cleaning, pesticide, whatever it is, nutrients, right? You have to follow the label by law. And there's some exceptions. You can use less of it and less concentration over time, but basically every other part of it, what the PPE specifically, the personal protective equipment, that is required. So if it says to use gloves, if it says to use a respirator, now that's mandatory. It is required, right? And so in OSHA, there's a thing called the Hazard Communication Standard that enforces chemical standards and the same rules that apply. So if a cleaning chemical says wear gloves, same thing, right? Same thing with nutrients, etc. But when we're talking specifically about pesticides, you're going to have some basically skin protection, eye protection, different types of masks, gloves, things like that. But the real big one is the respirator.
Yeah.
And there is a deep standard in OSHA that's called respiratory protection. It requires a respiratory protection program. Anything you use in your facility requires a respirator. So if you or your business chooses to use a respirator without those specific requirements, that's another use they call voluntary.
Hmm.
So voluntary means you're just using these respirators, and these can be N95s, just regular old face respirators, or they can be the different types of half mask, full mask, and they will be very specific of what type of respirator to use and cartridges, etc. But if you're using them either mandatory or voluntary, now you're going to have to create what's called a respiratory protection program. And what, as of recently, now the EPA and these worker protection standards are now just relying on OSHA's standards for
Hmm.
respiratory protection program. So they were enforcing, and they still are, but they now default to OSHA's standards.
Yeah. That makes sense too. And then what I'm hearing is that it's like really important for operators to read their labels and follow the instructions on the labels and their safety data sheets, which we're going to jump into safety data sheets a little bit later. But those are really two important tools, whether it's worker safety, OSHA, or following this WPS standard. And then my next question, and once again, I was trying to think if I didn't know these things, it's so confusing to
Okay.
me. And so WPS seems to overlap with the Department of Agriculture as well. In Colorado, I mentioned that earlier. For example, we have OSHA, and some states have their own OSHA programs, and they actually do come into cannabis operations and they do audit them and hold them
Mhm.
accountable and give out fines and violations. But this is not happening in every state. And then we have the WPS, the Worker Protection Standard Program, which is through the EPA. But
Mhm.
in some states, the Department of Ag, like for example in Colorado, our Department of Ag, they actually have a compliance program and they
Mhm.
come in every year and they inspect cultivation facilities here in Colorado and they have to follow these WPS standards. So I just
Yeah.
find it interesting. There is a lot of overlapping. And the other confusing thing I'm going to throw in there, and you mentioned it earlier, and you and I have both seen it, where we've seen a USDA pesticide log for
Mhm.
recording when a spray log or an applicator's log. And then we've also seen one that was put out by the EPA or the Department of Ag. So you have these three different agencies that have different
Yeah.
logs, which
Yeah.
you and I have been in a facility and they were like, we're so confused. We have this USDA log. Why do we have to have something from the EPA or the Department of Ag?
Yeah, and that pesticide applicators, there's it's state by state. And this is a unique one too, because like you said, is an approved pesticide list, and
Mhm.
that what that goes through is what the EPA calls is their SLN, which is a special local need program. What they do in each state, and it's usually again adopted by the Department of Ag, they go through different types because to go through to get a pesticide approved, the label is very important. So it has to be very specific. It has to say how you apply this to the plant, right? So a lot of these pesticides, even though they might be used on a big scale, they usually have to adjust or have to get their label and chemical approved by the special local needs process. And what they do is in each state they create a pesticide list, right? So then you have that Department of Ag doing their thing. Then you have the state that's regulating the cannabis operations, and then they have their own rules. And so
Yeah.
what happens is usually will add a requirement. I've seen add your employee badge number to this application, right? To this pesticide application. So it's really important.
To the log.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and usually, just FYI, you can't fit these on a normal 8.5 by 11. You got to
Yeah, they're
get
pretty big.
like the legal whatever the next size piece of paper, or you can do this technically, you can do it on a whiteboard, but you need the right categories, right? And with the USDA,
Or
with
couldn't you just have an Excel spreadsheet that you fill out?
literally in the worker protection standard, this needs to be accessible to the operators, at least for 2 weeks, right? So operators in this central location, which I'm sure we'll go
Oh, yeah,
into.
that's right. We are gonna cover that part too,
So
yeah.
there's a central location, and you have to have a certain poster that warns of pesticide hazards. And in this area, among other things, you have to have pesticide application log. It has to be up for at least 2 weeks. And so, however you do it, there's multiple ways to do it, but you have to do it. And I forgot how many. I think I can list off most of the categories. You have to have the employee. It's again, the state may require the employee badge, and there's different training requirements, which we'll go over too. But one of the ways you can legally apply these is to get a pesticide applicator's license. And you can get this either at the EPA level, the federal level, or at the state level. You have to check with your
Some
local state.
colleges actually when I was in Missouri, I was talking with some growers, and they were getting their certification at the local college in
That
Missouri.
that would make sense. A lot of times the departments of ag really they work closely with these colleges. Usually not too difficult. It's about $50 or so. I remember when I getting mine in Colorado. And it's a test online and it's a little bit of math and making sure that you can get the right dosing, right? Which is really
You need to know how to do math if you're gonna be mixing chemicals.
so it's fractions, yeah, a little bit. So that can take some time to really get up to snuff. But as licenses go, it's really one of the easier ones to get. But you can get that. So when you have this pesticide application log, you'll have your applicator license number, if applicable. You'll have then the brand name of the chemical, then you'll have the active ingredient, and then the amount of that chemical, and then the area or particular plants that this was applied to, and then a signature or initials of the applicator. It takes a lot of time and attention to really understand the standards here, and filling these out can feel burdensome, but it's really important. And it's really important to understand the different segments of these requirements. Like I said, what does the state want? Usually what I do is I start with the simple USDA, which incorporates the EPA standards of the application requirements, and then add the state requirements. It did you have to
Yeah.
put, etc. So knowing all of the people enforcing these rules is really important.
We're gonna start jumping into the requirements. I wanna talk about training and education.
Yeah.
So we talked about workers and handlers.
Yep.
So let's break this down because this can get confusing when I go in and audit some of these facilities. There'll be somebody spraying and they don't have an applicator's license.
Yeah.
And then I'm saying, "Where's your applicator's license?" And they're like, "Oh, we're just filling out the log and putting down the guy who has the applicator's license. We're just writing his number on the log, but he's
Mm.
not here." And or there is no applicator's license and they're just spraying. And also too, that applicator can train workers under them. So if you can break that
Yeah.
down a little bit.
No, this is again, this is a really good point that you're drilling in because it is confusing. In the worker protection standard, there's an education component, right? And again, like I mentioned, any employee that walks through an area of pesticide application, even if it was weeks ago, are required this education. There's multiple ways to go to give your employees this education. Probably the simplest way is to have somebody on site in your team to get one of these pesticide application license, again, through your state Department of Ag or the EPA. That's the easiest way. Why? Because then that person can give the required training to the other
Yeah.
employee. And so I'm actually certified. I got a train the trainer certification so I can give this specific training for both handlers and workers. But the unique caveat there is that I have to be on site. It can't be a remote education. So there's two ways again to do this to train your employees, to get somebody gets licensed and then do the training, or to bring somebody who's either licensed or have trained or trainer certification to give your employees training. This is required. They used to give you a grace period. It used to give you a month before these workers start working. They need this education. So that's why it's good to have somebody on site to be able to give this. The training, it's basically the same. With the workers, you have worker training and then you have handler training. The handler training is essentially the worker training plus another
Because
third.
the handler is the one who's spraying the
Yeah,
chemicals,
they
the
who literally.
applicator. The workers are educated, so when we're walking through the cultivation facility, and we'll dive into this in a little bit, but when I see a sign, I
You
understand what
know,
this sign means,
yeah.
or if things are going on, understand the things that handler is doing, and I have to make sure that I'm following the rules and regulations around the things that I need to know as that worker.
Yeah, and one of the biggest parts of this, the way I really see it, this is a standard for worker safety, right?
Yeah,
So less about the health of your plants and how to apply to the plants safely, and more about how do employees prevent pesticide exposure.
exposure.
That's
Yeah.
really what this is about. So it's a lot of wash your hands. So I like to remind employees, just when you're walking through a pesticide application area, just assume all the walls and floors are covered with a nice little residue of pesticide. So what the education does is it trains them to say there's some real hazards here, and you don't want to bring this home to your dogs, to your family, etc.
Yeah.
So be careful. But yeah, so the workers, it's more about, it's minimize the exposure, your exposure, and for the handlers, it's that plus how do you apply this safely?
Yeah, and also too, you brought up some good examples that the training is basically going to be covering pesticide safety, exposure routes,
Yeah.
PPE, emergency procedures, and also that restricted entry, the REIs,
Yep.
pesticide hazards like acute versus chronic.
Yep.
And I also want to give an example. So let's say a cannabis employee working in a cannabis cultivation facility, that worker walks into a room, that worker must know that if certain pesticides were applied to that crop, they need to understand that like, they cannot enter that room for 48 hours, 24 hours. And that information on the REI is going to be on the labeling. And that's where they're
Exactly.
going to get that information and
Yep.
they're going to write it on the signs. And I've
Yeah.
seen these signs a couple different ways. You can buy them on Amazon. There's probably companies that specialize in worker protection standards, PPE gear and whatnot, but you can buy these signs. They're in Spanish. Most of the time, they're in Spanish and English. One side is
Mhm.
Spanish and the other side is in
Mhm.
English. And then you write the REI. Here's what I come up against when I do the audits of these facilities. They want to take me into one of the rooms and I'll see an REI sign that says 4 hours. And I'll say, "Oh, I don't wanna enter that room. Your REI sign is up." And they say, "Oh, don't pay attention to that. That's old." And this is where it gets frustrating is, I don't know it's old. I'm not and maybe everyone else in the building knows it's old, but it's really important to just take the sign down or erase the 4 hours or whatever the allotted hours are on that sign so it's not confusing to people and that there's a process in place when it comes to these REI signs.
Yeah, no, that's one of the
Very common.
honestly, errors, mistakes, slash violations that I see as well. And these yeah, so the restricted entry interval, they should have when it was applied and how long,
Yeah.
the restricted interval is, and they should be taken down immediately once that's over, or it leads to confusion.
I
It's
don't
one
know
of the
why they leave them up, but they do,
Yeah,
and not
no.
all of them. Not all grows are created equal, but, some of them that I go into, they do get left up. It's important, it's good that they're having audits, and even the Department of Ag will say something to them as well. I wanna get into the central posting or the central location that we
Yep.
always like to talk about, and making sure that they're having access to safety data sheets. So why don't you go ahead and talk about these mandatory postings?
Yeah, so there's a few things here. The central location it's a few requirements, and postings are really the kind of the heart of it. Well, let's start with this needs really the safety data sheets as well. So this also is a little bit of overlap with the worker protection standard and the hazard communication plan and OSHA. So again, any chemical you bring into your facility, you need to bring into your hazard communication standard. This is an OSHA standard, but when we're talking about the work protection standard, you need to bring all of the pesticides and their safety data sheets. And this is again what's largely on the label. It's usually a little bit more extensive than the label. And these are the legal requirements to use this pesticide. What's really important, and again, the overlap with the hazard communication plan is that every employee needs to read this, right? And there's a lot of requirements. One, how to use the chemical, but more importantly, what to do if you are exposed. What if it gets
Yeah.
on in your eye, in your mouth, vomiting? Do you flush your eyes? Do you call the doctor immediately? Poison control. So it's really important that your employees, one, know what the emergency response is, if any of this, if they're exposed in any way. So that's one. So the central location needs to have your safety data sheets, at least specifically for each pesticide in this area. You also need all the basic emergency info, contact info, fire, EMT, etc., that know who to call immediately.
Nearest hospital or emergency room.
Yeah, I like that too, like routes to the meat hospital. That's a little above and beyond, but that's also really good
It's
information.
not hard to have that though.
Not at all. I will even put extra pieces of paper so you can take it and have directions to the hospital just in your hand.
Oh, that's a good idea. Just having like maybe like a pocket folder and there's a bunch of them printed off and they can just
Exactly.
grab
So
it
you
and
can
go.
grab it and go, and you don't need to know anything else except yeah. And then this is also the where you have to have that application information that we're talking about with the
The applicator's log.
applicator's log. And this is again what's on there, what's really important for them is the treated areas. When was it treated? Right. So this is all the mandatory reporting. You have to have a poster and you can get from the worker protection website. There's a new version the last couple years, but it also is English and usually has a second language, obviously a lot of times Spanish. But this is just general pesticide exposure kind of information poster. And so those are the postings and required information at the central location, as they call it.
I have a question. So, what if I'm a large cultivation facility? So, for smaller operators, I can see them having one central location. But what if I'm a 100,000 square foot cultivation facility? Do I need more than one central location?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
So usually most indoor and this is a great question because I want to answer it accurately. I know there is a distance, and I don't believe most indoors requires a second location, but what does is outdoor, right? When you actually have the giant outdoor grows, what they require is basically a mobile central location,
Hmm.
right? So this is and also as part of the central location, you need running water. You need to be able to wash your hands. You need basically a potential spill kit for pesticides as well. Extra clothes is another requirement. So if you get
So
it
you would
on,
keep the spill kit in the central location?
yes,
Okay.
absolutely. Yep, absolutely. So what you'll see in these outdoor working situations is like usually a little hand washing station that has a little area for all this other information and resources. So that is important. If you do have a large outdoor grow that you're able to mobilize these resources.
Yeah, I think too for the outdoor grows, I've seen people use shipping containers. Been
Mhm.
at a very large outdoor grow in Colorado, and they used several shipping containers. One of them being their central location. They also had the portable water stations, had portable eye wash stations for their
Mhm.
outdoor grow, and I think we even had them get a snake bite kit because for those who don't in Colorado, we actually have rattlesnakes that, especially
Mhm.
when you're out in the high desert, there are
Mhm.
rattlesnakes out at those outdoor grows, and you potentially can get bit by a snake, which you don't want to happen. But I would also say for some of these larger grows, 25,000, 50,000 to 100,000 square feet, I always recommend having 2 to 3 SDS stations,
Yeah.
spread them out equally throughout the facility on the
Yeah.
wall. Not only is it helpful for employees and they're not running across 100,000 square feet to get to one SDS station, they can do a quick access read and make sure they're following the instructions for how to clean their skin or their eyes out. But also, it's really helpful for the fire department. And that way, the fire department has quick access and they can see what chemicals are in the building right away by reading that binder.
Yeah. No, that's good advice. The other piece, the reason why I think most indoor facilities you don't need multiple locations because the big part of that is access to running water.
Yeah.
And with most indoor facilities, you have taps all around, right? But that's another big piece when you're working with pesticides is to know where the closest eye wash station and fresh water. It could just be a hose, right?
Yeah.
Especially outdoors, so you just know where that potential hose is. But knowing how to decontaminate and wash your eyes, so wash
Yeah.
your hands is a big component of the standard.
Yeah, and so the next section is REI, restricted entry intervals. And we pretty much covered this, and I'm just going to
Yeah.
go over this quickly. So REIs is basically clear signage and access control for areas treated with pesticides. Workers cannot enter until these REIs expire. This basically prevents workers from entering recently treated areas. Basically, a tip is REIs differ depending on the product and the application method, foliar spray versus soil drench. And I don't know if you want to add anything around spray versus drench.
Yeah, you can obviously pesticides come in multiple ways. Yeah, you can smoke them out with the sulfur. You can spray it. You can have things that you apply to the soil. They come in all different types. And the interesting thing too is that usually these REIs are the heavier chemical. And like I was saying, the 25B, they're typically a little more safer, lighter that some people don't consider pesticides. Be honest with you, most cannabis sprays and pesticides that are used don't even require REI. It's important when you have a pest integrated pest management program, you have different levels, right, of pesticides. So when you get an outbreak, okay, now we're bringing in the little hotter, some people would call it chemical that does a little bit more controlling of these pests than some of the lighter.
Also, too, that the signage should be clear, durable, and visible at all of the entrances.
Yeah.
And like we said, our tip was to take the signs down after that REI expires.
Yeah.
Uh, I know some of these cultivation facilities are all different. They're tight, they're retrofitted, they're
Mhm.
brand new, or they're retrofitted old warehouses. There's things like wall pockets and wall shelving if it's tight spaces that you can just keep the leftover signs. But it's really important to wipe them down and clean them and make
Mhm.
sure
Yep.
it's just not a bunch of old REI information on the sign. We're going to jump into the PPE, which is
Mhm.
personal protective equipment,
Yep.
to go over what's important. I know we talked a little bit about some PPE, but if there's anything else that you wanted to add regarding PPE as it relates to WPS,
Yeah,
worker protection standards, a lot of acronyms.
yeah, there is. The big things, really long sleeves, long pants, right? You don't want to have just expose skin unnecessarily when you're applying these. Again, the label, the first thing you should do is just read the label and or safety data sheet, right? That's the first step in using any chemical. And they're going to say, these are the things that you should wear. These are the PPE. They have a whole section on the label. And so you should read that first. And again, that is legally going to tell you the minimum that you need, right? But a lot of the other things that you need are goggles. I like, honestly, goggles and a face shield. That's a double protection for your eyes. Chemical in the eyes is one of the most dangerous things. I like to double up on that protection. Obviously, the types of gloves that you can wear, there's different chemical resistant gloves. Again, it'll say very specifically if it's nitrile. So sometimes those nitrile gloves that
Yeah.
facilities use for trimming, they aren't necessarily appropriate for some of the chemicals in these pesticides. So again, know specifically what's required. And a lot of times they'll use these Tyvek suits as well. This is something I've seen, and it's these Tyvek suits are being reused without
I know. I
and it
know.
and
Yeah.
so this is another thing to really think of too, is how you wash your clothes, right? So
Yeah.
when you're applying pesticides, what I really recommend too, one of the things is you don't want to take this home, right? So what I recommend is people have work shoes, chef clogs, they're like Crocs without the holes on the top. Like these are slip resistant, chemical resistant. You can wash them off. Also, you can just leave them at work, right?
Yeah, it's what we call part of the biosecurity plan.
And so you're going to get this chemical in the bottom of your shoes, right? And so let's not bring your shoes that you're going to bring home to your dog or
They
family.
shouldn't be wearing their shoes anyways. There should be separate shoes for cultivation facilities.
Exactly. And one of the things that I recommend too is to have a laundry system.
Yeah.
One of the recommendations is that if you are applying pesticides, is that you want to wash these clothes separately. And then after you wash those clothes, run another cycle in the washing machine to get that potential residue out of there so you're not contaminating. But it's really important. What I recommend, have work clothes, have work shoes, leave them there. Ideally, wash the clothes there. But again, if you're going home and you're taking these clothes home that you applied pesticides with, which again, hopefully you've changed at the facility and you're bringing those home in a separate bag, wash them in a separate cycle, then run the cycle again. So,
I wouldn't be surprised now if at least 50% of the cultivation facilities in the country probably have some type of uniform or scrub
you're
or something that they're providing. Especially these newer emerging markets, it seems that a lot of people they're taking biosecurity really serious and they're making sure that they have these decontamination rooms, these clean rooms, that they're getting lockers and like that old school where you're eating your lunch standing over the plants. There's no break. I think those kind of cultivation facilities are fading out, those old school cultivation facilities, although they do still exist. That's really helpful. And also, I would like to add that employers are responsible for training their employees on PPE. It's mandatory to provide training on PPE for employees. So that's definitely a requirement for an employer.
also,
And
I'd like to add to that too, just because that's a great point, and this goes to actually to the OSHA's requirement. The general duty clause says, as an employer, you shall furnish a workplace that is free from or likely free from hazards that can cause serious injury or death.
yeah,
That's a big statement, and what it's saying is that as an employer, you have a lot of responsibilities to your employee to create a safe work environment, and that includes providing them with the right PPE,
hmm,
educating them on that, but even more than that, they have to be able to come to you with a question about worker safety, including how to use a PPE or some type of hazard, and they must not fear reprisal.
yeah,
Right. So,
retaliation. Not allowed to retaliate.
yeah, it's an anti-retaliation requirements, which means these employees must feel safe coming to you talking about these issues. If not, that can lead to serious violations.
Yeah. And so I'm actually glad that we're talking a little bit about decontamination, which brings me to my
Mhm.
next section, which
Yeah.
is decontamination and emergency supplies.
Yeah.
So this is basically ready access to clean
Yeah.
water, soap, towels, eye wash stations,
Yeah.
um, in case of exposure. Now, I want to, I did a little research on eye wash stations because I wanted to go a little deep on eye wash stations
Mhm.
because as somebody who audits these facilities, and you do too, I
Mhm.
see all kinds of crazy eye wash stations. And I'm always
Mhm.
like,
Mhm.
what is going on? And I check the bottles. And I
Yeah.
would say probably, I don't know, a good percentage of the cultivation facilities I go into have, I believe I'm going to call this the right term. They have a eye
Yeah.
wash station,
Yeah.
which is the plastic green
The green.
holder with the 2 bottles of saline. And what I always discover when I go in is I pick up the bottle of saline, and a good amount of the time, it's 3 to 4 years old. And it's expired, and they don't have non-expired. They have very old bottles. They don't replenish them. They don't throw them away and get new ones. They just keep the expired saline bottles on the wall. And so, if you could just go over the different eye wash stations. So I have a plumbed eye wash, a
Yeah.
portable, and a supplemental. And so I know it can get confusing with eye wash
Yeah.
stations.
Yeah. And so those bottles are the supplemental. And so those really are to get you to a better, more plumbed eye wash situation, right? So again, what's required if you're outdoors is to have a hose, right? So they can immediately turn that on and flush it if it gets in their eyes.
It's a
Uh,
certain amount of time that your eye has to be flushed.
yeah, and if you look at most labels, if they're talking about again what happened when it gets in your eye, or they flush your eye, and usually the minimum amount is 15 minutes. Right, and that's the mandatory amount of time you need to be able to continuously flush your eyes. So you have these portable ones that are you'll start, right, but they won't necessarily last for 15 minutes. So when you get these portable ones, it's more, okay, get in the car, go back to where they're hosed or get to a plumbed situation or drive you to the hospital. So that's the
I don't
supplement.
even think a saline bottle would last 15 minutes.
No, it won't. That's exactly the point. So you need to get to the portable one that's like the little green station or to
Yeah,
which is tied into your water so that it won't ever run out. But all of these require maintenance and cleaning. This is another thing that you're right about is that they'll just put it obviously these wash stations like behind junk or storage or whatever, paint cans and
they're blocked, they're
they're
blocked,
all
yeah.
clear access to it, and you also need to maintain this. It's another thing too, a lot of times I'll see first aid kits that just aren't maintained that are used, and so your your first aid equipment, it absolutely needs to be maintained per manufacturer requirements. It's you
That's
put it
like fresh Band-Aids and gauze. A lot of times I'll open up the first aid kit and everything in there's yellow, and you're thinking, "Wow, how old is some of these?" Because after a while, the adhesiveness, you open a Band-Aid and there's no more adhesiveness left, which really tells me those are some old Band-Aids. And so it's really important. You could have the wall cabinet and you could just go to the store and buy boxes and replenish all the little compartments in that first aid station. And also too, the plumbed, so some people have plumbed eye wash stations where I find that they're connected to the plumbing. 'Cause I've gone over and tried to use one and it doesn't work.
oh,
And
yeah, and you need to flush these too, right?
yeah,
So hasn't been used, I wanna say, so annual flush,
I've
right?
seen them where they have a shower too on the
Right,
shower head,
yeah, those are great too. That's exactly sometimes
obviously
the dry
chemical
wash,
exposure.
emergency shower, that's more just for just general skin contact that you need to flush or you wash off. But yeah, you need to flush the water system. The water will get stale in those pipes. So yeah, and if it's not operating, then it's obviously not plumbed in. So something is cut off at some point. You had some type of valve that's cut off. So these are all points that, yeah, you should have
Yeah.
somebody that is responsible for safety, your safety program, and these are things that are typically overlooked that they should be maintained.
Yeah. It's really important. You want to have an eye wash station that basically allows you to provide at least 15 minutes of eye rinsing or eye washing.
Yeah.
And that when you guys are using the saline bottles, the ones that you're attaching to the wall, that is not in the requirement of that 15-minute flush. And it's basically it's supplemental. It's just enough to get some relief, but then get that person to the ER or emergency care assistant. So it's something to think about. I think a
Yeah.
lot of times cultivations, they just see, oh, I'll buy the eye wash stations on Amazon. I can get these saline bottles and slap them on the wall. I don't think a lot of people even understand or know they have to do a 15-minute flush. That would be my guess because I see those at most cultivation facilities have the green eye wash station on the wall with the bottles.
Yeah. No, and this is just another these are all great points to point that you should have somebody responsible for your worker safety. Worker safety manager, workers, they can be safety committee, depending on
Fractional, like you and I. You can have a fractional person. It's a way that operators save money. They also work with fractional compliance people like myself or Alex. And especially the way the industry now and people are trying to cut costs. If you don't have a safety manager, if you don't have that compliance team, it is good to have that person you can reach out to come in and go through all these pieces with you to make sure that your employees are protected. And so speaking about emergencies, I want to talk about emergency assistance and that one, employers must make transportation and medical information available if an exposure occurs, which is why we love the central location.
Yep, yep. I was mentioning what's the medical info? Where do you take these people? Where's the closest hospitals care as well? Also, you need to be able to respond to minor first aid cuts, different types of whatever slip, trips, and fall types issues as well. But it is really good for have drills on this. What happens if there's an exposure? What happens and again, to have the spill kits, like how do you contain a spill? What is the response? Sometimes it's they call them waddles that are these little big noodles that you can wrap around the chemical. It can be sawdust. But and again, what do you do if it gets on your clothes? There should be an extra pair of clothes immediately for somebody to take that shirt off or
Yeah.
whatever it is. You get them.
I like the idea of drills. I'm glad that you said that. When I go to my lap pool, I always see the lifeguards. They're always practicing drills all the time. Every time I go swimming, there's some kind of lane where they're practicing their drills and training. And I think at the end of the day, if you're going to have chemicals in your cultivation facility, the first top of the mind thought should be, how do I protect my employees? What are the things that we can do as an operator to make sure that manager or all the workers and handlers understand what they need to do if there is an accident? And we know accidents happened. I can't tell you how many times I cut myself or burned myself when I worked in the restaurant industry and then I had to go get stitches or I had to go to the ER. It's things happen, people slip, they fall, they hurt themselves, and that's why we have workplace safety. A couple I wanted to go over, and Alex, I'm sorry, did you want to add anything else before I hit the
No,
next section?
no, no, well said.
I want to talk about some common violations in
Yeah.
cannabis facilities that are related to WPS.
Mhm.
Then I'll go over this section, Alex, and I'll have you talk about best practices. So, some common violations are lack of documented training or expired training, because that training, the WPS training, is going to be tracked just like all your other training. You're going to track it when they took it, when does the certification or the applicator's license expire. You want all that on file. So that can tend to be in violation. So you want to track your
Mhm.
training. Your failure to post application records or pesticide labels, like Alex was saying, you got to have that binder available to employees to be able to review any kind of application records. Employees entering too early into treated rooms. This is chemical exposure. You're exposing your lungs, your skin, your eyes. And so you want to make sure that they're following signs and they're understanding and making sure that you provide it in multiple languages if you do have people that are speaking multiple languages, whether Spanish or English. Not providing PPE or employees are improperly using it, which also can cause chemical exposure. missing decontamination stations and grow rooms,
Yeah.
also lack of water
Yeah.
stations and grow rooms. Some states have fined operators up to $10,000
Yeah.
for WPS violations. That's a big number. That's OSHA numbers.
Yeah. No, it's serious. I do have to say, out of all the regulators that I've been exposed to, I really like the Department of Ag folks. They're usually just
I do
farm.
too.
They're just usually just real salt of the earth type folks. And they usually don't come in to really they're not there to
They're
harass.
not guns a blazing.
Yeah, they're not really there from my experience, and I'm sure every agent is different, but they're usually there to really help you. And I remember when we set up our facility in Leadville and they came up and it was really friendly because it was actually the first time that I was exposed to the work protection standard. And they were just really friendly. We had most of it. We didn't have all the pieces. I don't think we had some of the decontamination things in the poster. I think those are the 2 things that we needed. We needed the extra clothes and the spill kits, but it was really friendly. It was like, "Look, this is the first time we're here. Next time we come back, we expect all these things to be taken care of." And so, they're one of those agencies that really wanna give you the resources and just tell you how to do it. They're not there to really to cause you difficulty. But that being said, you don't listen to them. Yeah, it's 10,000 plus dollars. And usually into the way these agents go about it. Was it willful? Did we tell you and you didn't listen to us? Then that's serious. But if this is just an ignorance thing, a lot of the times they'll give you some grace and a warning. And really, again, the first couple times they'll probably work with you. If they come back a second
Yeah.
or third time and it's not addressed, then yeah, this becomes real serious.
I feel like we're pretty lucky in Colorado because our Department of Ag has done a great job, and they spent years built. I actually met the gentleman at the NoCo Hemp Expo, the original person who actually helped build out the program for cannabis cultivation, and then he moved over to working with hemp operators. And they did such a wonderful job. And when they first started, they put on all kinds of free classes and courses for the cannabis
Mm.
industry. I attended all of them in the early days. We're talking, this is back in, gosh, 2015, 2016 that they were doing these. And they just did a remarkable job building out the program. So hopefully whoever's listening that your state is making that same effort. If not, there's nothing wrong with reaching out to your Department of Ag in your
Yeah.
state and seeing, hey, are you going to be creating any kind of program for cultivators? And it's not a bad thing to try and figure out. It is important to follow these standards. And wrapping up, Alex, can you just go over some best practices for these cultivators?
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I know you and we like to have central binders, a folder. Obviously, this can be in the location. Have everything you need. Again, that's they call it a central location. It doesn't necessarily need to be in a trapper keeper or binder. But if you have one, put it to the training records. You can have the safety data sheets, all your application logs, and even the contacts in one binder. These it can be done multiple ways, but having it all centralized, knowing when the agency shows up that you're going to take them immediately to all the requirements, that makes it a lot easier to have any type of inspection. Also, you do want to make sure that you're on top of this education. So, annual refreshers, when does that happen? Also, when you have a new person coming on, again, there's no more grace period. If they're working in this application area, they need this training, either handler or worker. So making sure that's part of the onboarding process before they start getting their hands dirty, literally and figuratively. And simple checklists, make sure your signage and your REIs are correct, all your PPE requirements. Having a simple audit checklist is pretty simple to create. And to do these audits quarterly, do them 3, 4 times a year. Make sure that you're going through it. Again, these aren't real complicated. You do have to put some things together to make sure that they're all functioning. But to do a quick audit, this won't take a whole lot of time. Really, about 15, 20 minutes to do.
Mm.
Worker protection standard audit is what it usually takes me. So to make sure, hey, is everybody writing all the applications that are required? Having to do just the basic walkthroughs, do we have the requirements? It goes a long way. And then when somebody shows up, it's not scary when they do it. So high level, those are the big best practices I can give right now.
No, I think that's great. I think that's really helpful. And I would say just a couple call the action is for everybody to review their pesticide use and safety programs regularly, at least quarterly. And look, if you don't have these things in place, there are tools out there. You can
Mhm.
get the help. You can take training from the EPA, or you can reach out to your Department of Ag and find out if they offer this WPS training, as well as check with local community colleges. I know a few of them in Colorado and other states do offer training as well. And you can reach out for fractional support to people like myself and Alex, where we can come help you create those programs and make sure, that everything is buttoned up and you're protecting your employees. I would say thanks everyone for tuning in today. It was a lot of information that we're trying to pack in under an hour. And I feel like we could just do an hour just talking about a respiratory program, basically. We
Yeah.
could just do an hour talking about protecting yourself and
Yeah.
having a respiratory
And maybe
program.
the next thing we talk about,
Or
not
even
necessarily.
HAZCOM. Just HAZCOM could be an hour. It's crazy.
Yes.
It's just not
Yeah.
enough time, is why we have to break them into segments. So hopefully this is helpful for anyone listening who's working in a cultivation facility or getting ready to launch one. And thanks again to my best and awesome colleague, Mr.
Oh,
Alex Herding.
well,
I love working with Alex, and he is a great team member. And I appreciate you coming on today
oh,
and sharing
anytime.
your knowledge. And for anyone listening, you can find this podcast is streaming on Spotify, Apple, and iHeartRadio, or wherever that you like to listen. You can also check out my YouTube channel, which is at Under the Microscope with Jenny. Feel free to go and check that out and subscribe. And thanks again, everyone, for listening today. And thanks, Alex.
Thank you, Jenny. Looking forward to the next one.